Hello, everyone. I'm Kylie Goslin with the Partnership for Strong Communities. I see we have folks trickling in, so I'm going to give it another 30 seconds or so while we wait for folks to enter the room, and then we'll get started. Thank you. All right, welcome everybody. If you are here for the Partnerships webinar on Pathways to Achieving Race Equity in Housing and Homelessness, you're in the right space. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate all of you coming together to hear about this important topic. And we know many of you are engaged in working on some of these topics we're going to be talking about today with us. So thanks for coming. I think we have one of the most impressive speaker lineups we've ever had for an IForum. So I'm really excited for you to hear from both our keynote and the panel that we've assembled here today. Many of them aren't strangers to you and the partnership, and others are some great folks from the national level who are here to join us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kylie Goslin. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership for Strong Communities. The partnership is a policy and advocacy organization dedicated to ensuring that everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home that's affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. The partnership leads advocacy, advances original research, and brings together the coalitions needed to drive systemic change toward that shared vision. And IForums we've been hosting for many years. Once they were in person in our beautiful Lyceum, now virtual, but they're free education sessions that we host quarterly, highlighting topics that are important in our fields of focus, housing and homelessness. They're free sessions, and we're able to provide those free thanks to some sponsors that have stepped forward to assist, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, the Department of Housing, and of course, Melville Charitable Trust. So thank you to all of those sponsors and all of our supporters of the partnership who help make all of our educational events possible. So over the past couple of years, many organizations in the housing and homelessness space and many others outside of it have been having long overdue conversations about the role that racial inequities play and have played for many years in our work, and how we must work to identify those inequities and actively remedy them. So as many of us have known for decades, and others are beginning to learn, systemic racism and white supremacy are woven into the fabric of our institutions, communities, selves, and even the very social justice and housing programs many of us work to advocate for. And as organizations and advocates for housing justice, we know that we need to turn this racial equity lens, not only on our work, but also on our own organizations, their cultures and structures. And tackling this work in an informed, open, authentic, and effective way is what we are here to discuss today. So regardless of where you and your organization may be in this process, I hope that you'll find today's conversation helpful for purposes of advancing this truly important work. And you'll see the partnerships elements of our equity statement up above. A few housekeeping items as we move forward, and then I'm going to introduce Carlene. So this event is being recorded and it will be made available following the event on our website. We also have a YouTube channel where we post these events. So if there's someone you know who would benefit from hearing this information or wanted to attend today and wasn't able, please look for the link in upcoming newsletters. And we also want you to know that all attendees have entered muted, probably used to this by now. And if you have questions, please send a message in the chat box to the meeting host, PSC Zoom meetings, and we'll be doing our best to assemble those questions as we move through the presentation today. All questions go in the Q&A box, in the Zoom control panel. So check questions in the chat box, Q&A questions in the Q&A panel. And you can enter those at any time throughout the presentation. So with that, I want to turn things over to Carlene Sharmalis. And for those of you who don't know Carlene, she's our amazing collective impact and equity manager here at the partnership. Carlene is an insightful and innovative leader, as many of you already know, and I want to give her a big thanks today for not only designing and building, but also leading today's event. And a big thanks to all our speakers today for giving their time, talents, knowledge, and opinions here with all of us. So with that, I'll turn things over to Carlene.
Thank you, Kylie, and good morning, everyone. As Kylie noted, my name is Carlene Chamos, and I'm the Collective Impact and Equity Manager at the Partnership for Strong Communities. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers, and I self-identify as Black, Haitian American. And I'm currently wearing right now a navy blue blouse, and my hair is pulled back and in a ponytail. Now it is my honor to present the keynote speaker for today's IForum. Peggy Bailey is the Senior Advisor on Renter Assistance in the Office of the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Her responsibilities include improving policy and practices related to HUD's rental subsidy and supply programs. This include the Housing Choice Voucher and public housing programs, which help over 3 million people afford housing. Her full bio has been added in the chat along with today's speakers. And as Kylie noted, please feel free to share any questions that you have for Peggy in the Q&A during her presentation, and she will address them during the Q&A portion of the event. Thank you, and Peggy.
Good morning. Thanks, Carlene, and thanks, Kylie, and everyone at the Partnership for Strong Communities for inviting me today. It's so great to connect with Kylie in particular during today. I've known Kylie since my first job in homelessness, working at the national alongside each other at the National Alliance in Homelessness, and it's just so great that we've both gone on this journey for our careers together. So it's great to see you.
It was only like 5 years ago, Peggy.
I know. I still, every time I watch a Red Sox game, I still think about you and your lucky pajamas that year. So excited. I am sitting in my home office. My preferred pronouns are she, her. I identify as Black. I'm wearing a black jacket and multicolored top with a necklace. As I said, I'm just so excited to be here today. I think, when I think about this topic, it is fantastic that the partnership is focusing on this, and that so many within the housing and homeless community are leaning in to our responsibility to not just try to work on housing and homelessness, but understand that racism and discrimination are underlying that. And without addressing and talking about those topics, we're not going to get where we want to be with housing and housing people and ending homelessness and frankly, ending housing instability for so many families. We know that about 11 million families pay more than 50% of their income on rent. And that is just simply not sustainable, in addition to the hundreds of thousands of people who experience homelessness on any given night. I think about every time I think about this topic, I just think about how often in the work, and I've worked all of my career in this space, at least in DC. So definitely a few steps away from all of you who are on the ground doing this work. But frequently we are asked to go on tours and when we used to be able to do things in person, and how people just took for granted the fact that it was probably going to be mostly Black and brown people that we were going to see when we went on those tours. Just this week, Secretary Fudge and I and others at HUD went to New York City to visit public housing developments in the Bronx. And she held a resident forum, a roundtable, to hear directly from residents. And all of the residents were people of color. Of the 7 or 8 residents, all were Black except for one Latinx woman. And it just, and the conditions that they were living in were unacceptable. And I think the one of the key points was just how not angry people were, right? They were frustrated and they wanted issues taken care of, but it was heartbreaking to see how the lack of anger that they had for the conditions in which they lived. And that, as the secretary said during her visit, was unacceptable. People should be angry about being homeless. People should be angry about living in conditions that contain lead and mold. People should be angry about having to spend 50, 60, 70% of their income on rent in a country that is as wealthy as the United States is. You know, HUD released our worst case housing needs report earlier this fall, and we'll include a link to that report in the chat. One of the things that makes me most proud about that report is that we actually do have demographics by race. It's amazing actually to see how often researchers, due to a lot of reasons, don't have demographic data within their reports. They just report things nationally. You can see that even today when we report about the unemployment rate, that we talk about it nationally. But I really want us to dig into that kind of data by race, because I think you would see that last time I looked at it, at least, at the points at which the unemployment rate is best for Black people in particular, it's at its worst for white people. So the things that we celebrate are actually not acceptable for white people, and we don't talk about that enough. So on the worst case housing needs report, on page 19 is where we start to get into the demographic data. And you can see the huge disparities of worst case housing needs for people, in particular Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, and for American Indians. One of the interesting pieces of the report, though, is that we start to hint at some solutions. Within the report, you can see that there's a high rate of having housing assistance and vouchers among Black people. And you can make a correlation that actually closes the worst case housing need gap for Black people. And so housing assistance is a vital part of the solution. And this is without any intentionality, right? We've just had the voucher program, we've administered it. It definitely has some issues within the structure of it, but even without intentionality, we've been doing a good job of closing the housing affordability gap for low-income Black people in particular. You know, it's interesting. This is my first stint in federal government, and being in an administration that allows us to be introspective at the federal level is particularly interesting. And challenging, right? There's so much of what we do at the federal level is the undergird of it is legal precedent or regulation precedent, and the ability to change those things is even the analogy of turning an ocean liner isn't adequate. It is tough, but we're not shying away from the challenge. Secretary Fudge and Deputy Secretary Todman are committed to first and foremost acknowledging the role that HUD and our policies and programs play in housing instability and homelessness. It is refreshing to be within the federal government, be able to talk about things like paternalistic policies that we have and paternalistic programs that we have, how to value people and the residents and the people who receive assistance and center them in our work and not the programs themselves. And to be able to acknowledge where change is going to be a long road. And so how can we start to be transparent about that, not shy away from that understanding of knowing that some of the things that we have to do right now may not be as may still have those underlying racist and discriminatory results, but we're going to help communities overcome even the challenges that we have. Being able to, for example, figure out how to use, during the pandemic, communities are having to figure out how to use proxies for targeting resources to Black and Brown communities, since there's always the complication of not wanting to, of the fair housing law and our concern about reinforcing segregation of people in low-income communities, and that balance is difficult. But it's something that we're talking about and trying to figure out, how do we help communities overcome. So some of the things that I think you'll hear about today, but things to know that are important to us and the administration in trying to address racism and discrimination in housing are first and foremost looking at the paternalistic nature of some of our programs. So for example, in my space, I'm working on how to help renters build assets and a credit history very intentionally, and how can our programs scale up some of the lessons that we've learned around helping families build savings. Some of that work has been rooted in focus on perceptions of families not working hard enough or not having skills, when that's not the case, and a lack of recognition that building skills and taking jobs training classes don't necessarily correlate in increased income, because employers get to choose how much they're going to pay people. And if the pandemic didn't teach us anything, it should definitely have taught us that there are people who are vital to our economy that we don't pay enough money. So instead, let's work on, of course, helping people if they want to and they feel like they need to, and it will help them build job training skills, but also have access to the same sort of financial assistance that any of us rely on, that help us understand how to manage our resources, how to invest if we have that opportunity within our organizations or money that happens to come in, and being able to build that future so that people can, and having that not be centered on something on home ownership necessarily, right, as the only way to build wealth. Many people, but it's one solution. And so thinking about that continuum of, and as Kylie pointed out, as a centerpiece of the partnership's vision, really choice, right? Being able to understand that people have agency and are intelligent and can make choices for themselves and their family is one piece. As I said, another piece of our work is looking inward at HUD. And we just recently have started to all be in, or many of us be in person. And one of the things that rose up in our conversations is we all recognize that HUD can often be a barrier to overcoming racism and discrimination. So let's not be that barrier. Let's remove those obstacles that we set up to the degree that we can. And so we're very, very focused on that. And then the last piece that is centering people. As I said, the secretary and I just went to New York and we spoke to residents almost exclusively, and that's who she wants to hear from, and making sure that if nothing else, we can be a voice for them in their communities to make change and make things better. So overall, President Biden has charged us through a series of executive orders to do this introspection. Some of it we're doing internally, and very soon in the new year, you'll start to see more public statements about what agencies have underway and how we're addressing racism and discrimination in our portfolios. And I'm while a lot of it creates a lot of nervousness because it opens us up and makes us really vulnerable to criticism, I'm super excited for you to see the work that we've done over the last 11 months to examine ourselves. And I want to challenge all of you to make yourselves vulnerable and do the same thing within your organizations. And as Kylie said, it's important to do that with your external work as you're reaching out to people, but that internal work is what makes that external work, because we as organizations aren't trusted if folks can see, and they will very quickly see, that we haven't done the work ourselves to create high quality work environments and hire the staff that are attuned to the role that racism and discrimination have played in our policies, and really working to value the people that we all serve. So with that, I'm really excited to participate in today's panel, and I will pass it back to Carlene.
Thank you, Peggy, for the insightful information around the work that's happening at the federal level and the information that will be released over the next couple of months. So I'm excited to view those and use some of the information to inform some of the work that we'll be doing over the next couple of months and years to come. Now, I would like to transition us into a panel discussion. It is my pleasure to briefly introduce Susan Thomas, president of the Melville Charitable Trust, who will be moderating the panel conversation. I will now pass it off to her to further introduce herself and the individuals who are joining her on the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlene, and thank you and Kylie for inviting me to moderate such an awesome panel. I've been excited for this conversation. And Peggy, thank you. I can officially say that I have friends in high places now. And it's great to see the work that you're doing and the contribution that you're making. It's really exciting. Some of the things that you said just really resonated with me, but I think what you said towards the end about ourselves doing the work is what resonated with me most, is that how can we make change if we ourselves are not doing the work? And what the administration is committed to doing in terms of looking at themselves internally is unprecedented. And to admit that programming is paternalistic is unprecedented, that we're hearing this all said out loud. So it's an exciting time for me to see an administration that is positioning itself in this way. So thank you. I am Susan Thomas. I am a Black woman. I am, today I have big hair like the 1980s. I am wearing a multicolored cardigan sweater, and I identify as she, her. I'm the president of the Melville Trust, and the Trust is a national foundation and a foundation that funds here in Connecticut. And we're focused on the root causes of homelessness and housing instability for Black, Indigenous, and Latino people. And I will pass it on to the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Amanda.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Andere. I am a Black woman trying to outdo Susan in her hair height. I have an Afro puff. My hair is in the style of an Afro puff. I am wearing a black shirt and have some chunky jewelry on in some orange and teal colors, because I always wear orange and teal, or some version of teal. And my pronouns are she, her. I'm the CEO of Funders Together to End Homelessness. We are a national network of philanthropy committed to preventing and ending homelessness through racial and housing justice.
Thank you. Abby.
Good morning. My name is Abby Anderson. I am a white woman. I have brown hair, brown eyes. My hair is half up and half down about shoulder length. I'm wearing a blue turtleneck with a burgundy blazer, and I have small hoop earrings on. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder of the Justice Walk. I do coaching for leaders of all kinds that is rooted in equity and justice work. And I'm really excited to be here this morning.
Thank you. Janita.
Hello all, Janita Hayes. My pronouns are she, her. I am an African-American woman whom my mother has coined one of her honey bronze jewels. So that will describe my complexion. I love color, so I am wearing an awesome yellow hat. I do wear glasses to help me with sight, and I have an awesome dashiki shirt on today that has the colors of red, yellow, and a lot in between. I am the equity manager at Supportive Housing Works, where we come together with our partner organizations to address the housing instability and those who may be experiencing homelessness in Western Connecticut.
Thank you. And last but not least, Stephen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Hernandez. I identify as Hispanic or Latino. My pronouns are he, him, and él. I am wearing a bow tie in the style of a Scottish or Irish tartan. I'm wearing very short hair today. I just got a fresh haircut this morning, glasses, and as usual, I am wearing a smile. Good to see everybody.
That's awesome. So in our roles, and just bouncing off of the last thing that Peggy said about doing the internal work, in our roles, we have formal authority, which is what our job description says that we have purview over and responsibility for. But we also have informal authority, and that allows us to move things outside of our job description within our spheres of influence. And so thinking of your formal and informal authority within your role, what is your accountability to advancing racial equity? And I'd like each of the panelists to answer this question, and it doesn't have to be in any order.
I'll go ahead and start. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think it's related to the last thing Peggy talked about when we talked about like that internal reflection. And so we often think about power and positions of authority in influencing systems and trying to influence policy. I think that's really important. But as we start to advance our racial equity work, I would like to think about how we have accountability and influence over supporting each other. And so I view myself accountable to you, Susan, and to you, Peggy. And I'm yet to meet other folks on this panel in a more intimate way. But I have accountability to Black women first and foremost and always. And I think that's really important because this work is super hard. It demands that we have a vulnerability that Black women, Black men in particular, and people of color are not allowed to show up as in our spaces of influence. And so I often think about, to advance this work, how are we accountable and supporting the people who are leading the work in a way that allows them a soft place to land, allows them to be themselves, to grapple with things in spaces that are not just safe, but bold. And we often talk internally at Funders Together about what does it mean to be pro-Black, pro-Indigenous, pro-LGBTQ. And a part of that is really the authentic self that gets to show up and gets to be in community with each other. So I think it's really important that I should have influence over supporting leaders who are doing the work and creating those spaces.
Thank you.
I'll reflect a little bit on the informal authority part of it. You know, my family on both sides were third and second generation in this country. And if there's anything that I remember most clearly from inheriting from my grandmother and my mother, is this sense of don't lose your agency and don't allow anyone to take your agency away from you. And this was spoken and unspoken example. And when I think about, Peggy, when you talked about that sense of resignation that you saw among our peoples, right? That sense of, this is the way things are, and I can't be upset about it. You know, I model being upset about it. I model being impatient, that I am tired of seeing Black and brown bodies in less than dignified and self-actuated and fully realized spaces, the way that you described, Amanda. So what I do informally is that I try to model that impatience, and I say to my people, be impatient with me, because within one generation, if not within one decade, your situation can improve, and we can do that together, and I've got your back.
Yeah, I want to build off of what Stephen and Amanda have said in a way. You know, it's interesting for me because I don't have a staff exactly, right, in my organization. HUD has 4,000 employees. And my job is very much an intermediary between, you know, the different program offices at HUD and the secretary, and then the public when I'm asked to be out front. And so the way that I've thought about it is, I don't know what's happening in the rest of the building or the rest of HUD nationally. But what I can commit to is that when people are in a space with me, it's going to be a safe space, and we're going to speak the truth. And they're going to know that the secretary has charged me to charge them to try to create those spaces on their own. I think the other piece that building off of something Amanda said about, you know, what we have to hold ourselves to, one of the things is to also help people understand that we aren't going to be perfect, and that that's okay. And especially in the political environment that we have right now, that can be a hard thing, because we're all terrified of one little thing being the thing that is on the front page of the Washington Post. And so knowing that as long as we're trying, and we had a reason, and we thought through what we were doing, then we have each other's back, and we will fix it if we make mistakes, is something that, not one, as a perfectionist, I have to remind myself continually. And two, when I remember it, is very freeing, and something that I'm trying to exude out amongst the 4,000 employees at HUD.
Ooh, no pressure.
I can build on that as recovering perfectionists unite. When I think about this accountability and what our role is, right? My role is a little different now than it used to be, but the story that I can tell is of a former nonprofit executive director of the Connecticut Justice Alliance, right, with a mission to end the criminalization of young people. And the journey it took personally for me to recognize that while I thought I was, you know, a good person doing a good thing, and we did some good things, but the blind spots I had around the fact that of my white skin, and that I had never been arrested, that trying to be in this field doing this work as a non-directly impacted person didn't make me a bad person, didn't mean I didn't have a role. But it meant I had some blind spots, and there were ways in which I was perpetuating inequity and causing harm. And so it was my accountability to do that work, but also then to think about what that meant for the organization as a whole, and to think about what that meant for rethinking leadership, and what does that look like. And so we worked as an organization to look at those things, and transition to a youth adult partnership, and to look at putting directly impacted people in the center of everything that we were doing. And that was a misstep. I shouldn't have said inviting, and really truly including, and with stipends and paying for time and expertise. And so now in my role as a coach and consultant, it's my job. I believe, as Amanda said, my accountability is to the people who are the most marginalized, right? So it's Black, queer, transgender women, right? I think of Angela Glover Blackwell's, right, the curb cut effect. One of the most at what do the people who need the most in our community need? And if we meet those needs, where does that go? And how that's going to actually serve everyone, although it's enough to serve those needs. And I think when I think about the accountability now, one of the roles I can play in that accountability to the people around me is with my conversations with my white peers, right? The ways that I can get access and have access problematically to spaces that other folks might not be able to, and what are conversations and discussions I can bring up. Having conversations, there's been a lot of talk already about safe spaces, making sure that my peers understand that that doesn't mean safe for our feelings. That means we're going to be discomforted, and we're going to have things that we thought were true blown up, and we're going to have to process that and be okay with that, and do that on our own outside of asking those others to process that for us. And those are skills and tools that white people generally don't have, that we need to build. And I think one of the roles I can play is to be a part of walking that journey with folks and moving that forward.
Awesome.
So it looks like I'm last, but what I tend to do is I gather all the information first before I spew out what's in my mind. But the main thing, I know I'm accountable to myself and my community. It's something I've been, that's how I was raised. And then I'm also accountable to my immediate family, right? So my husband and my children, and how my actions and the actions of others, how they impact and leave a lasting impression. And so with every role I've had, no matter what job it was, even if it's simply, cleaning up the church and picking up, the trash and putting it in garbage, I've done it knowing that I am trying to demonstrate how to live a life that impacts everyone, right? So I want to demonstrate the love that I know I want from someone else in every job that I come across. So currently in my role, I am able to build relationship and trust and really help, because I tend to find what it is, what's the right word? The potential that everyone has to make great change. Sometimes we can't see it ourselves. And it's someone else that points it out and say, hey, you're really good right here. You should really look into, right? And I tend to do that naturally all the time, whether someone asks or not. And so in every single role I've had at Supportive Housing Works alone, I've had an opportunity to have one-on-ones or smaller group or larger group trainings or meetings where I'm really leaning in and allowing trust. And then I'm helping to hopefully push folks forward into that strength, and knowing that, helping them to see how their part of the bigger picture is important and is needed when we move this work forward, when it comes to race equity, when it comes to justice, when it comes to any and all things that are impacting our community, whether you are the one being impacted negatively or positively. And so once I understood that, it doesn't matter whether it's a formal or informal role, I am going to show up as a gatekeeper. I'm going to show up as someone that wants to find out what your interests are and then help to propel you, but then also helping us to see how it impacts us all, so that hopefully we are making the right choices, so that we are undoing the wrongs, and continuing to make a better future for my kids who are still really young.
A sign of a good panel is authenticity. And you guys, I love your honesty. And I also love it that in answering this question, none of you really talked about your job description, but you talked about bringing your whole authentic, perfect and imperfect self into this work to be able to advance racial equity. And that's what it's about. It's bringing our whole selves in. It's not about our job description. It's about the work is investing in ourselves, investing in people. And the informal authority, all of you kind of gravitated towards how you use your informal authority. And I think that that's beautiful. I'm going to direct this next question to Amanda and Steve. You know, when you think about advancing racial equity, what needs to happen at the policy and systems level? Can you speak to that?
Amanda, it looks like you want me to go first, so I'm gonna follow your lead. I'm gonna follow your lead, and you know, that's a great question, because I'll tell you what I've seen at the policy level in the past couple of years, which has really resonated for me. So 2 years ago began, on the one hand, we realized just how deep our cultural emergency was. And on the other hand, we fell into a biological threat, right? So those two things came together in a way that really threatened the foundation of our stability as a country, as a people together. And what was remarkable to me is how quickly we were able to mobilize on behalf of the middle class. It was stunning. And what was stunning about it was that you were able to see people take what was an emergency response, quickly fashion it into a survival response for economies, for systems, for all of these things that we rely on, right? And what struck me is that when people put their minds to it, when people put their hearts to it, and when we mean it, we can actually make change, right? And that's what the same people who've been in charge for generations and haven't been able to move the needle on so many things that we're thinking and care about, right? About Black and brown equity, about injustice, about poverty. So if we can make all of those changes and infuse life into a staggering economy and community, why can't we address some of these institutional ills that remain even post these last 2 years and all the innovation that we've seen? So what that says to me is that if we mean it, we can achieve it. We just have to mean it. And I'll tell you, I'm proud of Connecticut because we showed a lot. We did a lot in this last couple of years, but it is not nearly enough when it comes to the levels of injustice, systemic and otherwise, that have been baked into everything that we do. I know that we mean it, right? But we have to show that we mean it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, someone wrote amen. That's right, Janita, amen.
We got the amen quarter already. Taking folks to church. I would say there's 3 or 4 things I've been thinking a lot about. And if you've heard me speak before, I've said some of these things, but we still haven't gotten there. So I'm going to repeat them until we get there. So I think the first thing is settling ourselves into the racialized history of this country. And hold on and hear me when I say this. I often think that our unwillingness to really settle into history on if you're more progressive or you've been, following the debate about critical race theory, that tendency to shy away from history is a human instinct that we can vilify on one side and say, hey, they don't want to learn real history. But I've seen it happen in our own movement, where we read one book, we quickly go to one panel, and we think that we've got it all. And what we know is that the tool of white supremacy is to keep us from the information that will undo the oppression. And so our learning can't stop. And yet, what I find is that a lot of us come to this realization, this awakening, and we think that we are going to get to the answer of how to be anti-racist and just through one daily task or one panel. And this is lifelong liberation work that takes daily, hourly, minute attention. And you have to feel uncomfortable in it. And it's only when you feel uncomfortable is when you know that you're doing the work. I think the second thing is around our imagination and ability to understand that more resources do not equal equity and justice. And for a long time in our work, we've been fighting for more resources. And while there's going to be unprecedented resources from our Peggy and our friends who are working in this administration, and we are grateful for that, The real work will come with us and on the ground, and how we execute those resources in ways that acknowledge the racialized history, that acknowledge that marginalized communities don't have access, and hear me, friends, that acknowledge that the nonprofit industrial complex are gatekeepers and porters to resources in ways that don't reach community. So until we start to unpack and undo that, like we are just going to get more resources. And I would say the last but most important thing that we can do from a policy standpoint is actually start to listen and trust community and make policies that say that we have listened and trusted communities. Peggy talks all the time about success can't be determined by proximity to whiteness. And also equity and justice can't be achieved without proximity to marginalized communities. And we bring people all the time to tables and circles and chairs to listen with a folding chair without a permanent chair. And quite frankly, we actually need to Abby, we need to create the spaces and give up and share power so people can create their own spaces of power and accountability. So we are listening to them first, not inviting them to listen to us, to listen to them. So I think those are the things that we really need to focus on.
Thank you. I love that folding chair versus permanent chair. Yes. So in order for this to happen, for these systems and policy changes to happen, on the ground, in the field, because you said something very profound just now. You said more resources does not automatically equal equitable outcomes, right? And so on the ground, and I'm targeting this question to Abby and Janita, what needs to happen culturally on the ground in the nonprofit field in order for us to achieve equitable results with these resources? What needs to change?
So the fact that we need to be ready for the change that we think isn't necessary, and that the change or the ideas may not come from within, but it's within our community, but may not come from within our system or our nonprofit or our what have you. So we need to be ready for the uncomfortable feeling of thinking we've had it right for so long, and allowing us to go through those feelings, go through the emotions, and trust the process, and really, show up authentically, knowing that we only get better together. And we've been missing some pockets of folks from the table for a while. And then it became apparent to us. And then we finally we're making movements to bring them to the table, but making sure we're bringing them authentically, right? Not the folding chair, but like, you have a voice, you have a vote, you have, we need to make sure that pathway is easily accessible for everyone and anyone that wants to come to that table. And then do the hard work. You got to do the work. So we can talk a lot, but it's the action that really proves to the community that's been looking and watching whether or not we're authentic with things that we're trying to do. So that's where I would say we have to be ready for the change and know that we're not right all the time. And that the answers may not come from us, but from those who have been watching us for so long that are ready to come to the table.
Thank you. Abby, I'm going to push you a little bit more on this because you're in a position where you're coaching leaders. So are our leaders ready for this? Are our organizations ready for this? Oh, you're muted.
Trying to follow the rules. So those are two very different questions, right? Are our leaders ready and are our organizations ready, right? And so I think there are a lot of leaders out there who are ready. There are a lot of leaders out there who aren't. There are a lot of people who haven't, there are a lot of people out there who are leaders who have not been identified as such because of the identities they hold or the communities they are part of. They are more than ready, right? One of the things that the justice advisors, or the young people involved as equal partners at the Alliance, you know, there's that conversation about, you know, the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. No, I've seen it. They're the leaders of today, right? And so I think we put a lot of limitations on folks that we don't see as leaders. And one of the reasons for that is because of, you know, the term gatekeeper was used earlier. And it's something that I think as leaders, I know as I've had to reflect on it a lot, especially as a white leader. Are you a gatekeeper or are you a door opener? Right? And who are you making sure that you're pulling through with you? And frankly, for a lot of us white people who are used to being assumed and then placed in positions of power, it's not even who do you bring with you. A lot of times it's who do you do who do you suggest instead of you, right? Because there are a lot of times where I might not actually be the best expert on that, right? I have never been arrested. So if you're talking about what needs to be done to improve conditions of confinement, why don't you talk to my friend Hernan, who has been incarcerated and knows that, right? And I think we make a lot of assumptions about who experts are based on things that aren't relevant or are relevant, but not the only thing, right? I can get a lot of information from a book and there's space for that. It's not the only thing that should be engaged, and it needs to be balanced out, at the very least, balanced out, if not overbalanced by people with lived experience. So I think leaders need the bravery to push, but also organizations and systems, right? The nonprofit complex was set up in a state. So I used to say this about the legislative process in Connecticut, right? Gonna go bold. Connecticut has an extraordinarily racist state budget, right? It is a really problematic state budget that prioritizes white people and white people's needs and wealthy people and wealthy people's needs, right? The appropriations hearing process is incredibly problematic, right? You have people come up and they've done the system where those hearings are in the evenings instead of during the day. Right. But I used to say that it was my job to go out and fight in front of the legislature that I need money, this incredibly small piece of our state pie that's allocated to extras, like all the social services. I have to go up and advocate why we should have more for children's mental health, the juvenile justice system, right? But it's all me and my other advocates from different nonprofits or state agencies fighting against each other for this really small piece of pie. Right? Instead of saying I said, I would love one day to get all of my friends and colleagues together and say, we're not going to participate in this. It's demeaning, it's problematic. And I reject the premise. But if I don't go and fight for those funds, we don't get them. And my board would be within its rights to fire me for not doing my job. Right? So organizationally, we get in these things of like, am I propping up my organization? Am I propping up my mission? But also, how hard can I fight without losing the ability to feed my family or put the roof over my head? Right? So I think a lot of this, I'm so glad Amanda's on the call and that you're on the call, right? A lot of this comes down to how funders have created this nonprofit environment and what expectations need to change on nonprofits and on nonprofit leaders. We're accountable to our boards. We're also accountable to our funders, also problematic. But you can change that by changing what your expectations are on us.
And I don't take offense of that because that is true. I think a lot of what we see in the field is perpetuated and oftentimes created by the way that philanthropy funds. And that's something that we need to say out loud, because if we don't say it out loud, then we're not going to change it. Something that you also said that was really interesting about the relevance of certain issues. I heard earlier this week someone talk about, are we in the business of making things interesting relevant? Or are we in the business of making what's relevant interesting? Think about that. So how do we connect what's happening at the policy level and what's happening on the ground? There's like a divide or disconnect sometimes between what we're pushing in terms of policy and what we're actually pushing on the ground and able to implement. And there's also a disconnect between what's happening at the federal level and what happens at the local level. Oh, that's happening in Washington. That's happening, that's the federal budget. Let's build back better. And then, but we have our own issues, you know, that we need to advocate for. What needs to happen to bring those two together?
I have to say, the image that came to my mind was the great and powerful Oz, right? That tiny little person hiding behind this big, loud mask of smoke and mirrors that teaches us time and time again that there is a difference between these institutions and the people that they serve. That is the big ruse, because there should be no difference. The people that they serve are the ground on which these institutions stand on. And the reason that it's so hard to get into these buildings is because the institutions want you to think otherwise. Now imagine if the people fully understood that their sense of agency is the engine that should drive these governments, the engine that should drive these conversations and these budgets. If they knew that the keys to these buildings should be in their hands and not hidden on the other side of the door, they would walk in not wanting to tear down the institution, but take that permanent chair that belongs to them. So that's what's I think is the power of understanding civics and your role as an individual in the civic fabric. Melissa said on the chat, you know, some of these things are already written, right? We don't even know what's in there. That's by design, y'all. The reason those books are so inaccessible is because we don't want them to change so quickly, because how disruptive would that be? What it might do, in fact, is it might lead to more equitable government, more equitable governing, and a government that actually responds to people and their needs, lifting us all up and having each of us realize our potential. That's what the ruse is about. And that's why I think about the Wizard of Oz.
I love that, because the equitable government and equitable governing is terrifying to some.
I see it a little bit differently, and maybe, and I don't know if, but a little bit differently. What I see is not a difference between programs and people and understanding, but a focus on the program. Oftentimes what I've seen, especially over the last 6 or 7 years of my career, where I've really moved more into the DC mainstream, is a desire to protect a program. So if you think about the Affordable Care Act, right, and Medicaid, there's a lot of messaging that's about protecting the program. You have to protect Medicaid, and it's not about protecting people. And over the last few years of really thinking about this, that is a huge problem, because people think protecting the program and protecting the people is the same thing. And so then, you know, to the second part of Stephen's point, then that's where we come together, right? Is where that it's not the same thing. Protecting the program too often is protecting the racist and discriminatory and paternalistic natures of the program, and not helping people connect to that better. Also, I think what I see is often power players think they know what people are going to say, or assume that people won't have things to say about this particularly technical thing. So it's like, oh, well, of course we're going to invite people with lived experience to the table, but they won't have anything to say about this thing, whatever the tech, especially when it's like a technical conversation. And so many of us are constantly saying, but you can't just, the whole point of listening to people is we don't know what they're going to say. we shouldn't, we need to frame, we need to, so what if we spend a half hour, an hour, and they're like, and you're like, oh, well, I don't know how to apply that to this thing, but we probably, well, one, we might be surprised because we don't know everything. And two, we might learn something that may not apply to this thing, but could apply to something else that we're working for. And the whole point is to make, and we may have educated those folks on the things that we're working on, so that they understand more of some of the technical points of things that we're working on. So, it's not just a take. Oftentimes I see this as a lot of a take experience, and there's not a recognition of the relationship that we should be building.
Mm. Who else wants to comment on, thank you for that, Stephen and Peggy. Who else wants to comment on how do you bring these two together? How do you connect what's happening at the policy level with what's on the ground and in communities?
I mean, I can speak to that really briefly in closing the gap at the risk of being flip, right? It's how do we make sure that the people who are at policy tables, who are people who have lived experience, right? So it's there. Amanda said something earlier, right? So it's not, I'm inviting them to listen to me, to watch me listen to them, right? So it's not that somebody who, like me, is invited to a lot of policy tables is listening to people on the ground and then trying to translate when I get to sit at that table up at the legislative office building, right? But it's that people with lived experience are actually the policymakers, right? You look at Cori Bush, right, becoming a US congressperson. I get this, and I'm going to sleep on the steps of the Capitol until somebody understands what's going on, right? That we shift the gap. But I also think it's being very intentional, and I put something in the chat. Civics aren't taught in school. They're certainly not taught in school in New Haven. They might be taught in school in Westport or in Farmington, right? And in my experience, a lot of young people don't, they were like, I know they're red and blue, and I think Trump is red. And that was the extent, right? And I don't put that blame on them because nobody has taught them. They don't have an experience of how it actually does impact their lives. So I think that intentionality of how policies are made, how those policies impact, and then really being intentional about supporting them in what it looks like to participate, because it's also not fair to say to directly impacted people, how come you're not testifying? How come you're not writing letters to the editor? It's like, well, because I'm working 17 hours a day at really low paid jobs. I don't have the luxury of time to do policy work. And that's a very real thing as well, that we need to be able to figure out how to not judge people for doing that, for not doing something that isn't in their wheelhouse to be able to do, not because of capacity intellectually or any other way, but because of literal time in the day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also
go ahead. Yes.
I think that's right. And I also want to challenge ourselves as gatekeepers to think about how we've built, and when I say we, I mainly mean philanthropy as well as just like structures, how we've built policy and advocacy systems to rely on this grass tops, very DC focus type of way of doing things. And that is, I think there's accountability on both sides to that. So what are we doing to engage in brave conversations and principled struggles with organizers and activists who will challenge our way of thinking, but bring us to better policy because they're on the ground or have lived expertise. And we have to recognize that we've largely depended on advocating in policy from folks who get paid, a good deal amount of resources who have at their disposal access and power. And to your point, Abby, we never like really share or give up that power or say, how about you instead, in a way that is transformational. We often do it in very transactional ways. And I think that is critical, not only to just changing the system, but to thinking about equity and justice in a way that doesn't respond to the current environment, but tries to create a new environment. Because that's what we're doing in our policy work now. Like, we're on a timetable that's responding to Congress, that's responding to the administration, but embedded in that, as Stephen pointed out, are barriers that prevent us from actually having the time and the space to really try to think about transformational policy, because we're in this cycle of responding. And so we don't often look to community to inform our decisions.
And I'm going to riff off of that, because how can we shift that balance of power? In the chat, Francesca Martin asked, how can we shift the focus of policy makers from to people and away from programs? And what would that look like? So, we're in this place where policymakers are, and we're seeing it play out, are advocating for themselves and their self-interests. And somewhere along the way, I don't know if it's ever really been this way genuinely, they're not advocating for the needs of the people that they're representing. And so how do we shift that? What will it take to shift that dynamic where we hold policymakers accountable to representing us and our interests and the people?
I think we need more entrepreneurs, more innovators, more builders, more designers in the policy and in government. And by that, I mean single moms who actually figure out how to stretch their budgets beyond compare. I mean individuals who have to wait in lines and be subjected to lotteries in order to get a deserved benefit, and are kept from actually improving their lot, but yet make it every single day and are able to get their kids to school and take those 3 jobs. Those are the types of innovators and entrepreneurs that I'm talking about. We need more of them, more builders and less helpers, because there are too many helpers in government, too many people that say, I'm here to help you. I know what you need. I know what program is going to serve you. But that helper gets to go home at the end of the day. The entrepreneur, the builder that is our families that are living in distress, they don't get to go home at the end of the day. They bring it all with them. That's the kind of people that I want to see in policy.
I mean, let's be clear. When we're talking about equity, what we're talking about is just redesigning programs and resources so they're more equitable. And that's great. And that's a wonderful first start that we have not accomplished and we should still work on. But justice and liberation, where our North Star should be, would say we don't even need those programs in order for people to have their basic needs. And so we actually have to flip and start to work towards that justice orientation, where people have agency and power over where they live, how they live, and what makes their community safe. And that agency and power doesn't come through having to participate in a program with barriers. It comes from having housing as an entitlement, as a right, having their basic income met. And so we will be in this equity journey for a while until we shift to a justice mindset.
Yeah, I think it's going back to the nonprofit industrial complex, right? Organizations get caught in keeping themselves alive, when in reality, funders and boards should be asking, instead of asking questions, how do you plan to sustain your organization after our grant runs out? What's your timeline for your organization being obsolete? And what can our funding do so that you no longer have to exist, right? We should not have a criminal legal system for children. So there shouldn't be an organization that exists to help those kids, right? So it shouldn't be, how are you going to exist forever to help kids in the criminal legal system? It's, how are you going to eliminate the criminal legal system arresting children? And making that shift, to Amanda's point.
Mm-hmm. We're at this nexus of opportunity here, where we have a federal administration that is not afraid to admit that structural racism is real. We have heightened awareness of and cries for justice. In addition, and I love, Amanda, that you made the distinction between racial equity and racial justice. And we have this unprecedented amount of dollars that we hope when Build Back Better gets passed, coming down into community. And we do have the infrastructure bill as well. How do we make sure that we don't live out, once again, the definition of insanity, which is continuing to do things the same way and hoping that it will just be different? How do we deal with this nexus of opportunity that we have before us? Because the money's coming. And Peggy, I'd like to start with you.
So that's a good question, because I think one of the pieces that I'm realizing is there's a degree to which we won't, right? There is a degree to which, particularly we being the federal government, we'll have to do, we'll do things the same way that we always do, because we haven't done the work yet to have the foundation to be able to do things differently. And what I'm realizing in this role of federal service, right? They're just so that is one recognition that I want to, but that I think is particularly important, right? So knowing that, right? Where one on our end, where are the places where we do have flexibility and we'll be able to kind of think about things differently. And one of the places I think is in the legislation itself and protecting programs like the Community Reinvestment Fund, where those resources, we fought very hard to try to design a program that it's not states that apply, it's not local governments that apply. It is community-based organizations have to be the lead to get those resources. And so just in designing that program, that is one of the things. And so, which is extraordinarily important to many of us, that folks start to think about what that means now, because while that program is designed differently, the implementation of it is probably going to be very similar to the way we as the federal government implement a lot of things, very complicated, require reporting, all of these things. So thinking now about the community organizations that are traditionally not able to access federal resources, but with a little bit of help can, from a philanthropy standpoint, or from a state and local community standpoint, and investing in them now is really important to help them be ready, because it's no secret what's probably going to be required from the federal government for them to access it. We don't have to wait. Plus, by some, if we're unlucky and Build Back Better doesn't pass, now you've also strengthened that organization to keep participating. There's not this isn't just about the Build Back Better proposal, right? This is helping these organizations with what I always call, and Susan and Amanda hear me say all the time, the unsexy things that organizations need to be able to be in a position to engage with us. And so that is also important. I think the other last thing I will say is that, what I've found is, being a part of this administration, is that a lot of people are taking a lot of things for granted. And I think that is a mistake, right? I hear often, you haven't come to talk to me. You haven't come to ask me X, or and I am like, well, why haven't I gotten a letter from you asking to talk to me? Right? Like, what is that? Like, y'all, a lot of people are sitting back and just thinking, oh, President Biden got elected, boom, 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 sunshine and roses and rainbows from now on. And that's not it. So another piece of changing to make sure that things aren't done the same is actively engaging with us, and demanding things of us, and making sure that this balance of being concerned about criticizing the administration because of the outside world, but not also asking us for the things that you want. We're committed to doing a stakeholder process and doing things, but I think knocking down our doors to make sure that we do things differently and being very specific about what needs to be different. We know that it needs to be different. What I have been saying for the last now 15 months since I worked on the transition is we need specificity. What are you seeing at the local level that's not working, that needs to change very specifically, so that we can act on those things?
Awesome. So we're going to do a rapid round with the rest of the panelists, and thinking about what Peggy has said from where you sit. What is one thing that, from your vantage point, we need to make sure we don't do in order to not live out the definition of insanity? Rapid round.
So don't assume that things aren't already happening in the community. So when I was in my role, newly in my role a year ago, I started canvassing to see what organizations, what groups are already happening, talking about the issues that needs to be uplifted. And they really just need the support. Maybe it's the financial support, maybe it's our networks. So really knowing that I think someone has said, those closest to the problem have the solution, right? So I am going in my own community, trying to find out what other meetings can I be a part of and just listen, and then see how I can use my position, my place, my authority or my power to help to bring whatever resources are missing or whatever networks are missing to their table so that they can continue to do the work that's needed.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to call on you. Great.
One thing we can do differently is stop, as institutions, as people who are here to help, stop fetishizing multi-generational poverty. Become impatient with it, right? Don't make 20-year plans on poverty, right? Make 20-month plans on poverty. And I think if anything, I would ask you to believe in my people the way I do.
Thank you. Abby, Amanda.
I would say stop making policies, and I don't just mean at the federal level, I mean at all levels, in our nonprofits, in our local governments. Stop making policies that fundamentally say we don't trust poor Black women. Because I feel like what we've learned through this pandemic and through things like the delay and the obstruction of all the rental assistance that was available is that we made policies, we've had practices that fundamentally say we don't trust poor Black women. And what we need to stop doing is that, and just trusting people with resources. Philanthropy needs to turn over resources to community, and government needs to ensure that resources get in the hands of people with the least amount of barriers. And that has to be our focus.
Thank you. Abby, you're muted.
I think I'll round that all up by saying, do be brave and do be willing to take the steps that need to be taken to stop doing the things my colleagues here on the panel have said, right? Peggy said earlier, permission to be imperfect. So I think, and especially to my white peers, we have to get over ourselves and get over our fear of doing things wrong, and be willing to try and practice apologizing and saying, sorry, I screwed that up. I'll do better next time. And that, I think we can get paralyzed by, well, I don't know how to do it perfectly better, so I'm just going to stay where I am, and be willing to try really hard and get it wrong and get feedback and continue to improve.
Thank you. So I think now we're opening it up for questions. And let's see. Are there questions I've missed in the chat? I haven't been watching, I haven't been doing my job and watching as closely.
There's one question in the question and answer section about the focus on whether there's a lopsided focus on rental versus home ownership. You know, the beauty of choice and the beauty of meaningful choice in housing opportunity is that all of these trajectories of housing, whether it be from going to having a rental as a modest individual, to building equity, to building wealth, to finding work opportunities so that you can own, so that you can build a family, so that you can pass on intergenerational wealth. That's the type of mobility that we were talking about earlier. It's the type of mobility that is woven into what we understand to be the American dream, whether or not we've had access to it. And I think it's critical to really see that, to see a trajectory and to offer the privilege of that trajectory as a right to every single person under the umbrella of this country and institution. So I think part of our social contract should be, how do we help build wealth? How do we help encourage ownership so that we can pass on that wealth and that equity multi-generationally?
I think one of the things along those lines of like, what are we doing in that space? So I'm the senior advisor for rental assistance. My colleague Elena McCargo was the senior advisor for housing finance and is now the first Black woman who's the president of Ginnie Mae. But we will, Ginnie Mae is still a part of HUD, and we will be continuing to work together. And in her position, she'll have the opportunity to strengthen that link between renters and home ownership. Overall, what she and I have really tried to do is to exhibit breaking down the silos within the housing world, the housing side of the world, not to mention the homelessness side of the world, right? And why we see each other as renters and homeowners, and neither the twain shall meet from a programmatic perspective. That we have like the Section 8 home ownership program, but it's terribly broken because it doesn't work quite right, because of a lot of it is because of the lack of the connection. We have things like the family self-sufficiency program, which in its name you can tell is based in paternalistic ideas, but is a way of helping families save money, but still has flaws to it. If we start to think about our role of as a continuum and do, as Amanda said, put resources in the hands of people, so that people have access to down payment assistance, that we do help people save money so that when they get into a home, they can afford the things that come with home ownership. And the last piece is that we start to look at what we can do to keep housing, single family housing, affordable. There's this dynamic of low cost single family housing being turned into rental housing, which does have benefits for renters, but also takes a vital piece of the home housing stock out of circulation from a home ownership standpoint. We need to think intentionally about that and figure out those pieces. One of the things, just from an overall understanding of how the pieces work, while this is one place where looking at budgets doesn't show you the priorities, because a lot of the rental budget from a federal perspective is Congress does, it goes through the regular congressional process, and you can see line items. In the single family home ownership space, a lot of what we do at HUD is paid for by the lending, like the mortgage side, and paid for things. So you don't see it in the budget so much, but there is a significant investment at HUD when it comes to home ownership, I promise.
Peggy, there's another question in the chat. We have time for maybe one more from Patricia Wallace, and she asks, does HUD see the problems at the local level when cities act on CDBG in ways that perpetuate injustice? And I want to tag on to that question. How does HUD hold or will they hold communities accountable?
So there's two parts to the question. I think one, yes, because this administration is energizing, putting more energy behind the affirmative furthering fair housing and the Fair Housing Act enforcement overall. That is our major tool to act on communities that are perpetuating injustice through any of HUD's programs, and particularly CDBG. The challenge is that obviously takes time, and we also get a call from communities to have flexible resources that communities can use the way that they see fit, right? And breaking down these barriers to using resources. We saw this play out in the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. We worked really hard at the federal level to give communities a wide range of flexibilities. That also means that we take a little bit of our oversight tool away because we've provided all of these flexibilities. This is a huge tension point, because then when we do that, then we're said, well, you've got to tell us exactly how to do this. And we end up taking away a lot of communities' flexibilities. And CDBG is an example of that, where communities have a lot of flexibilities to use those resources as they see fit. We do need to understand and hear when injustices are perpetuated, so that we can provide guidance to communities, but also maybe involve the Office of Fair Housing in that piece. But that also shows, where we've talked about the need for local and state engagement to happen, so that the flexible tools that the federal government provides are used locally in a way that moves us to a more just society.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our time. I'm going to turn it back over to Carlene. I have so enjoyed moderating this awesome panel. This has been great for me, and you guys have inspired me tremendously with your honesty and your authenticity and your hope. So Carlene.
Thank you, Susan. And echoing all of the sentiments that you've just noted, and I'm taking in all of the conversation that you just had and making mental notes for future conversation that we could potentially have together, and hearing from you all around, creating the safe space, supporting the individuals who are doing this work, just and engaging those with live expertise in the work, and doing some of the internal work and reflections are important. And then moving from racial equity to racial justice, and for people to be actively engaged and participating in the process. I wrote down so many of the different teams, and I only have about 3 more minutes, and I don't want to take it all, but I'm pretty sure you guys were capturing those as well. So just want to say thank you to our speakers for exploring this topic with us this morning, and for the incredible conversation you've just had around ways that we can continue to address the inequities and representation culture and systems that we are seeing in housing, and some of the ways that we can work collaboratively to mitigate these inequities. We know that this is not easy work, and you all heard that today. And there will be some individuals who fight to keep the status quo, and there are individuals like yourself who care and want to create that equitable society and a better world for yourself and your children. But this change won't happen overnight. I tend to be very naive that things can happen when I want it, and that it will take time to dismantle years of cultural and systemic racism. But we really must take advantage of the momentum that's happening now to advance this work. And it is incumbent upon all of us every time we wake up thinking about solutions to address homelessness and housing instability to ensure that they are accessible and equitable for all individuals who need who need them. And you all had noted about doing that internal reflection work. So internally at the partnership, we've started doing some of the work around the leadership of the organization, looking at the makeup of our board, executive team, staff, and the membership composition of the two campaigns that we as an organization staff and manage, and discussing if it is representative of the population that we serve. For example, the Reaching Home Coordinating Committee, which coordinates the work of the campaign and provide guidance to the Reaching Home work groups, in September approved the recommendation to work to diversify the membership composition of that committee by 30% by next year, and creating like a pathway for people to join our table. Organizationally, we've taken the time to review our organization's employees handbook to ensure that the language is inclusive and that the policies, procedures, and benefits provided to staff are fair, accessible, and mirrors our values. For example, last year, we removed the staff matching requirements for our retirement plan. We've modified our job description and expanded our job search engines to have a broader reach of applicants. And lastly, we've been doing ongoing bi-weekly staff facilitated conversation on race equity and discussing how these learnings apply to our work. We have a running list of books, articles, and videos from fiction to nonfiction that we are reading as a staff to help in our effort to becoming more race conscious. And as Amanda noted, the learning can't stop. In our policy, research, and communication work, we've created a research associate program that works to highlight racial inequities in the housing system and incorporates the voice and stories of people with lived expertise. We've modified our legislative priority templates and initial conversations by adding questions for the work group to consider that gets to the root causes of inequities and the ideas that they want to explore. And as Kylie mentioned earlier, we've developed an equity statement that we've all agreed to and are working towards as well as a plan. And this is just a brief overview of some of the work to date. And it is just a start to the work that needs to be done. Each day, each conversation, each event, we learn something new and we work to incorporate these new learnings into our work. And as I reflect from today's conversation over the next couple of weeks, I will be thinking about that one thing that I can do in my role and within the sphere of my influence to continue to advance racial justice. I hope you all join me in that journey. I saw a lot of you exchanging contacts via the chat, so I hope that you do that follow-up over the next couple of weeks. So once again, thank you for joining us this morning. I look forward to continuing this conversation at a later date. Be safe, be well, and happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.